My name is Erkki Veltheim. I'm from Melbourne and I play the violin. Today I thought I'd talk about microtonal pitch fluctuations as improvisational materials. In psychoacoustics and theory of perception, they talk about something called just noticeable difference. So that's something that I'm really interested in how small a pitch variation can you perceive as a listener and as a performer. And of course, if you're playing two tones at the same time, that pitch difference becomes very small, the just noticeable difference. And for me, it's very much to do with trying to find ways to hear things better, to become a better listener and a better musician, as well as finding techniques to utilize this pitch perception as real materials rather than just, let's say, an effect that you just make two tones beat against each other. So finding the different gradations and the increments in this kind of microscopic world of pitch. So just to demonstrate, I'll play a little double stop thing on the violin. I'm going to use the open D string as a more or less steady, stable drone, and use a stop note on the G string around that same D to create these different microscopic phenomena. So that's just moving gradually further and further away from that unison D, and trying to actually hear how the beating can be kept as a real kind of musical material. So in fact, I'm trying to keep a beat in my head in order to have some kind of regular mechanism of comparing the different number of beats against that pulse in my head, and I think that's something that I find very fascinating to do myself, is to really get inside that pitch material, but as rhythmic material as well. So in a way, it's this meeting point where this nexus where pitch and rhythm actually are one. Again, we get into kind of the realm of psychoacoustics and the limits of human hearing. At which point do you hear a pitch as rhythm versus as a constant tone? So even in that little exercise, something like a quarter tone becomes a huge step compared to the really infinitesimal microtones that I've explored before. And also you notice how when the pitch difference is small enough and really you get into the world of just slightly out of phase pitches, tones, that affects the timbre of the instrument. So you hear the phenomena in different ways depending on how big the pitch difference between the two tones are. I also like to then combine that kind of practice with it's a very instrumental thing, but with the contact point of the bow on the string. So bringing more harmonics towards the bridge, and seeing how then the overtones, that the different partials that you start to hear in the sound, start to interact with the two very close pitches that I'm playing. So you start to hear all this kind of quasi-chaotic interaction between the upper partials of the open string and the stop string that is just slightly different in pitch, in frequency from that drone. So things like that I like to bring to my improvisational practice as a way to, I guess, find a rich domain of new materials from a very limited resource. Now, of course, on some instruments you can't play double stops or can't play two tones at the same time in the way that you can on a string instrument. So in those cases, you can, for instance, record or use electronics as a way to create the stable drone, or also create slightly more complex textures by having a fluctuating drone or having two tones to play against. So for that, for instance, I use the Max software. You could use any kind of music production software to create these pitches and use frequencies that are comfortable to play on the instrument or resonate well with the instrument. So I've created for instance, a max patch here that I like to listen to as an exercise and also play with as another exercise. Also, it's very instructive to compare listening to something like the patch that I'm about to play with headphones versus other speakers, because when those beating tones interact in the air of the room before they hit your ears, it's a very different sensation to the binaural beating that you have if you have a strong stereo image in your headphones and create these beating frequencies. So here is basically the open D frequency as a stable tone. So I can play against that as a single frequency to create those beatings. To make things a little more interesting, I've also got different presets here that I've created in this very simple patch, where I now have two tones going that are beating at 4 Hertz or 4 cycles per second difference. So with that, I can add a third tone and create even more beatings as my frequency interacts with both of those two frequencies. I also have a preset here that I've created which has a stable tone and another tone that wanders around that stable tone to create a little bit more interest. And again, I can add that third tone in order to then start to find a more dynamic or more expressive way of interacting with this microtonal world. These kinds of exercises I find make me a better listener and as a result a better musician. Even if I don't use these techniques every time I improvise or pick up the violin. I really find that they push me to the edges of my perception and really open up this new world of timbre, pitch and rhythm where all of these things are interconnected and really become quite a physical sensation. And for me, a very joyful sensation and a hypnotic one when I'm in that mode of playing. So I hope you enjoy trying out some of these things and thank you for watching.